I first wanted to talk about the issue of insurance. You met with insurance companies last week. What was their clarification of who's covered and who's not covered? Because there is a little bit of that grey area.
There's no question that not every Australian who's been flooded carries flood insurance. It's been an issue unresolved for a couple of years, and now tragically it's definitely back in the news. It's the question of most Australians have storm flood damage. In other words, if the heavens open up and dump the rain on your roof, then you carry insurance.
So is that flood coverage?
That's the flood coverage which most people have. But of course, a lot of people, and I'm sure it's the case elsewhere in the world, don't always read the fine print of their policies. And very few Australians, or not very many Australians, have riverine flood damage. In other words, not the rain coming from the sky, but rising floodwaters. Now, these issues are troubling. There's no question in our mind at the government that this is an issue now which is right in the spotlight, and we need to fix up once and for all. How do we make sure that there are a good stock of riverine flood policies? But our insurance companies are also moving in a timely fashion to help put people back on their feet, those who do have insurance. And I think there's a role for all of Australia, government and the private sector, to help all of the people who've been affected recover from these floods.
I did read a quote from an insurance industry spokesperson who said, we can't cover everyone who doesn't technically have flood coverage. It's not financially sustainable. So are they shifting their position, or are they digging in their heels with that stance?
I've generally found in life that megaphone diplomacy with anyone doesn't assist. So I'm not going to sit here and give a lecture to insurance companies. I trust that insurance companies recognise there's a long-term issue in the way which flood coverage is defined. I don't expect insurance companies, if a person has no insurance at all and never taken out insurance, to simply provide an act of charity. But in between an act of charity and sensible insurance coverage, I think there has to be some work done with the Australian insurance industry to help make sure that people know what they've got in their policies, and that the policies do cover a lot of the situations which some Australians can expect to encounter.
Let's talk about the hit to GDP, because I realize that you're still calculating the cost of the damage, but some of the analysts out there are already saying that Australia's GDP will decline by between 0.5% to even 1.5%. What is your estimate at this point?
I've seen the numbers and assessments, and obviously we take all the forecasts seriously. And as frustrating as it may be for some people watching what's happening not to hear a definite answer, we still don't know the extent or whether or not some of the numbers are overstated or are accurate. It will have an impact on our economy. The most important thing in these floods has been the loss of life. And I think appropriately Australians are focused in terms of helping people who've been grieved. The funerals are starting. That is where I think most people's heads are at. I think Australia's emergency authorities and volunteers have responded very well in the crisis. The next stage is now to assess the damage where the floods have abated. But in my home state of Victoria, there are still many communities which are facing possible inundation. First things first, let's get the immediate recovery and support. In the longer term, there's no question that there'll be crop damage. There's no question that there's been rail infrastructure which has been adversely affected. This hasn't been great for tourism, and obviously retail will take an impact. The challenge now, though, will be to make sure that we recover in the most timely and efficient fashion. And I think Australians are very resilient. And in my experience with natural disasters, as bad as they are, people do pull together.
And as you pull together and look into the long term, the Prime Minister is saying that she's still very confident that she can reach a budget surplus for 2012 to 2013. But there have to be cuts that are going to be made in order to reach that, especially with the costs of the recovery and the damages here. Where will the cuts be made?
Well, let's again just line up the sequence of events. We've got to get over the floods, which are still underway in parts of Australia now. The Prime Minister, Julia Gillard's made it clear that our aim is to be in surplus in 2012-13. There's no doubt, of course, that these floods and the damage that's been caused is going to require some reassessment of where we put our resources. But it is too early to start saying what's in, what's out. I think that what we'll see is a commitment to support our communities who've been distressed. We're going to work with the private sector. The Prime Minister announced yesterday that our Treasurer, Wayne Swan, will be chairing a committee, including myself, with 10 of Australia's leaders from industry, from farming sector, from the large companies.
From private industries.
From private industry. We will work with the private sector because they are the engine room of the Australian economy, to ensure that the recovery steps put in place are as efficient and effective. I'm not convinced that trying to pluck numbers out of the air is going to assist the debate. What Australians want to know is that they can get back on their feet, for the families who've been bereaved, that there's support for them, and that the economic participants, the farmers and the businesses, that there'll be timely and structured assistance so that we can recover, which we will.